The first thing Luke Harrigan felt was the heat. Not the biting February wind screaming across the river. Not the ice pellets stinging his face. The heat. It rolled off the overturned fuel tanker in waves, licking at the undercarriage of the crushed black SUV, pinned beneath it. "Sir, you have to get back," a state trooper yelled behind him, voice ragged with panic. Luke didn't move. Flames licked along the tanker's side, tiny orange tongues, searching for a way in. Gasoline dripped in a steady, hissing stream onto the frozen pavement, spreading toward the car like a living thing. Inside the SUV, a woman's face pressed against the cracked side window. Blood on her forehead, eyes wide. Trapped. "I can't move my legs," she screamed, breath fogging the glass. Cars were backed up all across the bridge, horns, blaring, people shouting, phones held high, filming the nightmare. Somewhere, someone sobbed. "It's going to blow. It's going to blow. It's going to." Luke dropped to his knees on the icy asphalt and shoved his shoulders under the buckled metal frame. "Ma'am, look at me," he said, voice low, steady, cutting through the chaos. "You're not dying on this bridge. Not tonight." The tanker's metal skin groaned as the fire ate at it. 30 seconds, maybe less. Luke took one breath, tasted gasoline and fear, and wriggled further under the burning wreckage. "Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." 6 hours before that bridge turned into a furnace, Luke Harrigan was standing in the cramped kitchen of his rented duplex in Kearney, New Jersey, staring at a stack of overdue bills held together with a paperclip. Past due notice, final warning, utility shutoff, all the greatest hits. He set them face down on the counter before his daughter wandered in. "Dad, you forgot my sandwich," Lily said, swinging her pink backpack onto the chair. She was 10 all elbows, and determination, her hair still damp from the shower she'd taken in water he'd silently prayed wouldn't be cut off this week. "Did I?" Luke forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Guess I did. Good thing I'm fast." He moved automatically, hands already assembling peanut butter and jelly on the cheapest white bread the discount market sold. He'd done harder things in his life, tourniquets in the dark, chest seals under fire. But nothing knotted his stomach like the thought of Lily ever seeing the red stamps on those envelopes. By day, Luke was nobody special. Just a 35-year-old toll operator on the Riverline Bridge, punching buttons in a glass box, while commuters grumbled about prices. 3 nights a week, he turned wrenches at Sal's Auto, down on Passaic Avenue, for extra cash. The National Guard medic patch he'd once worn lived in the back of a drawer, now folded under a t-shirt that didn't fit anymore. Out there overseas, his skills had meant something. Here they were, just a ghost. "You working the late shift again?" Lily asked around a mouthful of cereal. "Yeah, kiddo. Ice storm coming in. They need someone up there who knows how to work a snow shovel." He ruffled her hair. "I'll be home before you're awake." Across the table, their neighbor Mrs. Russo sipped her instant coffee oxygen tube, looping over her ears. She'd watched Lily at night ever since the divorce. "You push yourself too hard, Lukey," she muttered. "Bridge doesn't care if you freeze up there." "Bridge pays the rent," he said simply. He valued work even when it felt like the world didn't value him back. You show up, you do the job. You protect your own. That was the rule he lived by long after the uniform was gone. By the time he clocked in that evening, the storm had arrived in full. Ice pellets rattled against the toll booth glass, hissing along the black river below. Tractor trailers crawled past their tires, spitting slush headlights smeared in white. Luke wrapped his hands around his thermos, watching the traffic roll. Another 12-hour shift. Another night where nobody would remember his name unless their easy pass failed. At 10:43 p.m., A black SUV shot through his lane without stopping, blowing past the toll, like he was invisible. He caught a flash of a face behind the wheel. Expensive coat, manicured hands, phone pressed to her ear. "Nice," he muttered. "Must be nice never having to stop." 2 minutes later, the radio on his belt crackled to life, the operator's voice high and shaking. "Unit 12, we've got a major collision northbound on the span. Tanker involved. Possible entrapment." Luke set the thermos down. Outside, the night suddenly glowed orange. The rain hadn't let up by sunrise, and the whole town felt waterlogged gutters, overflowing puddles reflecting gray sky, and every storefront window fogged with condensation. Luke Harrigan sat in the clinic waiting room, coat still soaked from the night before. Fingers wrapped around a styrofoam cup that had long gone cold. His shift supervisor had insisted he get checked out as protocol, but Luke knew what that really meant: file the paperwork, clear the company of liability, send the toll operator back to his booth before the next ice storm rolled through. He shifted in his seat, trying to stretch the ache in his shoulders. Crawling under a burning tanker had a way of waking up old injuries he'd pretended didn't exist. Finally, a nurse called his name, and he followed her into a narrow hallway, smelling faintly of disinfectant and coffee. The physical exam was quick blood pressure, scraped knuckles, bruised ribs, and then the doctor stepped out to process the forms. That was when Luke heard them. 2 voices just outside the thin wall. A man and woman, neither one whispering. "He should have never gone under that truck," the woman said. "What if he'd made it worse?" "He's a toll operator," the man replied flatly. "Not a firefighter. Or a hero." The woman scoffed. "My brother was stuck in that traffic backup for hours because that idiot decided to play cowboy." Luke stared down at the floor tiles. He'd heard worse in his life. But after last night, after the flames and the screams and the weight of that woman trapped under twisted metal, those words cut deeper than he expected. The doctor returned, oblivious to the conversation outside. "You're cleared to go back to work," he announced, "but take ibuprofen for the soreness. And maybe next time wait for emergency services before trying something risky. That's what they're trained for." Luke forced himself to nod. "Sure." Outside, the sky had brightened to a dull pewter. He drove home exhausted, but wired, knowing he'd have to face the morning routine before collapsing. When he walked through the front door, Lily and Mrs. Russo were already at the kitchen table. Lily was perched on her knees, coloring, while Mrs. Russo folded coupons. "You're early," Mrs. Russo said, raising one eyebrow. "They finally let you off that bridge. Can't keep a good man down." Luke tried to joke. Lily hopped off the chair and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Dad, I saw the fire on the news. Was that the bridge you were on? Did you see it?" He hugged her back, careful not to wince. "Something like that." There was a big explosion in the video. She continued stepping back and looking up at him with wide eyes. "Did you get hurt?" Her voice trembled just enough to give her away. He knelt down. "I'm okay, promise. Just a tough night." She studied him, searching for cracks. "Your face looks tired." He smiled, trying to soften it. "That's because it's been awake longer than it wanted to." Mrs. Russo watched him with a grim expression. "You look like you've been through a meat grinder. Sit down. Eat something." Before he could respond, someone knocked sharply at the door, an urgent, uninvited kind of knock. Luke exchanged a glance with Mrs. Russo, then stepped to the door. When he opened it, he froze. 3 men in city-issued jackets stood on the stoop, clipboards in hand. Luke Harrigan, the one in front, asked, "That's me." The man exhaled through his nose like he'd been expecting trouble. "We're from Central Bridge Authority. We need a statement regarding your actions during last night's collision on Riverline Bridge." Luke blinked. I already gave a statement to the state troopers. This is separate, the man replied. And mandatory. He stepped aside and motioned the men into the living room, but their expressions made it clear they preferred to stand. We've reviewed footage, the lead inspector said. And we have concerns. Lily drifted behind her father's leg, clutching his jacket. Concerns, Luke repeated. I saved a woman's life. You interfered in an active hazardous materials incident, another man said. You entered restricted space without authorization, exposed yourself to risk, and possibly contributed to the tanker's secondary ignition. Luke's mouth went dry. The explosion happened after paramedics arrived, and that ignition was from the leaking fuel hitting. We're aware, the inspector cut in, but from the authorities' standpoint, your behavior may constitute negligence and violation of employee safety protocols. Mrs. Russo slammed her palm on the table. You have some nerve coming in here, ma'am, the inspector warned. Luke put a hand out gently. It's okay. It's not okay, Mrs. Russo muttered. The inspector continued. Your actions also caused a 47-minute traffic shutdown, delaying emergency crews' access. I didn't shut down anything, Luke said, pulse climbing. Traffic was already stopped. I was the only person close enough to help. That's not the point, the inspector snapped. We need employees who follow procedure, not ones who take liberties. Lily tugged on his sleeve. Dad, she whispered so quietly only he heard. Are you in trouble? He swallowed hard. Not with anything that matters. The inspector pulled out a form. We're placing you on unpaid administrative review pending internal investigation. Effective immediately. You are not to report to the bridge. Luke stared at him. The words hit like a blow to the chest. Unpaid. Pending investigation. It didn't matter that he'd saved a life. It didn't matter that the fire could have killed him too. To these men, he was nothing more than a badge number who dared step outside his lane. Sign here, the inspector said. Luke took the pen hand steady, even as something tight twisted inside his chest. He signed. The inspector nodded curtly. You'll receive a notice by mail with next steps. Then the men filed out as abruptly as they'd arrived. When the door shut, the house felt too quiet, too small, too hollow. Mrs. Russo shook her head in disbelief. Those fools. That woman is breathing today because of you. Lily pressed her face into Luke's side. I don't want you to lose your job. We need it. He knelt down and put both hands on her shoulders, even though his ribs screamed at the movement. Look at me, he said softly. Jobs come and go. But you and me, we stay together. Always. Her chin trembled. She nodded. Later that afternoon, while Lily was at school and Mrs. Russo napped, Luke sat at the kitchen table staring at the shut-off notices he'd pushed aside that morning. The refrigerator hummed in the corner, almost taunting him with its ordinary sound. He picked up the electric bill. 4 days until disconnection. He set it down. Gas bill. 3 days. He set it down. Rent. Already overdue. He leaned back in the chair and rubbed his hands over his face, exhaling slowly. His body still ached from the night before, but the tightness in his chest wasn't physical. It was that quiet, familiar shame of feeling like no matter how hard he worked, the world was always one step ahead of him, ready to shove him back down. A soft tapping came from the hallway. Dad Lily's voice called as she stepped inside, backpack sliding off her shoulder. Can we talk? He straightened. Sure, kiddo. She walked over, hesitating before climbing onto the chair beside him. Some kids at school, they said stuff. Luke's jaw tightened. What stuff? That you messed up the bridge, she said softly. And that maybe you're gonna get arrested. She looked away quickly. I told them they were liars, but her voice cracked. Are they? He reached out, brushing her hair back. No, they're not right. Not even close. Then why are they saying it? She whispered. He paused, searching for words he didn't want to say. Because people get scared. And when people get scared, they point fingers at the wrong person. She blinked fast, trying not to cry. But you're the good guy. He swallowed hard. Good doesn't always get noticed right away. She laid her head on his arm. I hate when people don't see you. He looked down at her. In that moment, all the guilt, humiliation, and quiet anger pressing on him sharpened into something heavier, not because of what the inspectors said, but because his daughter had been dragged into it. Because she'd had to defend him. Because the world's judgment had reached her too. Mrs. Russo shuffled in from the hallway. Phone's been ringing off the hook, she said, holding the cordless handset. News stations, radio, and some lady from a law office. Luke stiffened. What did they want? They want comments about the accident, she said. Some reporter said you inserted yourself into a dangerous situation. He closed his eyes. Of course they did. It wasn't enough for the authority to investigate him. Now the world wanted a piece too. Mrs. Russo crossed her arms. You saved a life, and they're trying to bury you for it. Luke didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep down he felt something closing in a sense that this was only the beginning. That last night's heat wasn't done with him. That the fire he'd crawled under had followed him home. When he finally stepped outside that evening to take the trash to the curb, he saw a man standing near the sidewalk aiming a camera. Hey, Luke shouted. What the hell are you doing? The man startled, then lowered the camera slightly. Are you Luke Harrigan, toll operator? The one who get off my property? The man backed up. Just doing my job. Luke took a step forward, muscles tight. Find a different job. The man retreated quickly down the street, camera still rolling. Luke stood there, chest heaving, slightly rain beginning to fall again. He looked back at the duplex, at the warm kitchen window, glowing behind the curtains, at the silhouettes of Lily and Mrs. Russo inside, and a cold realization settled deep in his spine. This wasn't going to fade quietly. He wasn't just fighting for a job anymore. He was fighting for his name, for his dignity, for the one person who needed him to stay strong, no matter how much the world tried to tear him down. He headed back inside the rain, thickening around him, feeling the pressure closing in from all sides. Something was coming, and this time, he could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. By the next evening, the storm had grown teeth. Ice settled over New Jersey like a second skin coating stop signs, telephone poles, guardrails, everything. The street outside Luke's duplex was a frozen mirror, and the wind howled like it was trying to pry the houses apart. Inside, the heater groaned, as if it too were bracing for what was coming. Lily slept on the couch with an extra blanket, her breath fogging the cold air each time the heater shut off for a few minutes. Mrs. Russo dozed in her recliner oxygen machine, humming steadily. Luke stood at the window with his arms folded, staring at the swirling snowflakes. His phone buzzed again, another number he didn't recognize. Another request for comment. Another person wanting to turn last night's terror into tonight's entertainment. He silenced the phone. Again. Around 9:20 p.m., the lights flickered once, twice. Then the whole room went dark. Lily jerked upright. Dad, I'm right here. Luke grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and clicked it on. A dim circle of light washed over the living room. It's just the wind. Nothing to worry about. But he knew exactly what it meant. When the grid was overloaded in weather like this, the blackouts traveled fast, and the ice, thickening by the minute, was devouring power lines one by one. He moved to the window, sweeping the flashlight toward the road. Every house on the block was dark. Even the streetlight at the corner was dead. Then another sound cut through the night, a deep metallic crack, followed by a heavy thud. It came from somewhere behind the house, near the alley that sloped down toward the river. Then came the screams. High, panicked, unmistakably close. "Help! Somebody help us!" Lily's eyes widened. "Dad." "Stay here," he said, already reaching for his coat. "Grab another blanket for Mrs. Russo." He stepped outside, flashlight cutting through the swirling storm. The wind slapped him hard, freezing the breath in his throat. The screams came again, multiple voices now overlapping, frantic. "Down here, please." He followed the sound around the side of the house, boots crunching over snow and shards of ice. When he reached the top of the alley, he froze. A city bus, Route 97 by the faded number on the side, had skidded off the road. It had slid down the alley's steep incline and crashed into the retaining wall at the bottom, smashing in the front end. The impact had folded the metal like crushed foil. Steam hissed from the cracked radiator, mixing with the whipping snow. The bus rocked hard. The retaining wall had held, but the ice beneath the bus was splintering. The whole vehicle teetered on the edge of what had once been a service entrance cut into the riverbank, now a 15-foot drop to the concrete drainage bed below. Inside, the bus silhouettes moved. Crying, pounding on the windows. One woman was holding a toddler close, trying to quiet the screams. A man inside shouted, "We're sliding. Oh God, we're sliding again." Luke scanned the incline. No traction. No support. No responders anywhere near. And the river below half frozen, half churning with icy water. If that bus fell, people weren't getting out alive. He raised his voice above the wind. "Everybody stay still, don't move around, but panic has a mind of its own." People shifted. The bus leaned again, groaning on its axle tires, skating on the ice. Luke didn't think. He ran. Halfway down the incline, his boots slipped. He caught himself on a trash bin, slid the last few feet, and slammed against the side of the bus. The metal was ice cold beneath his hands. Inside, a woman's face appeared at the window, eyes wide. Please help us, I'm working on it," Luke said, breath fogging. He tried the door latch. Broken. He tried kicking the emergency release. Frozen solid. The bus rocked again. Dad Luke whipped around. Lily stood at the top of the alley, hair whipping in the wind, clutching his phone. "I called 911, she shouted. "They said responders are 15 minutes away." 15 minutes. In this weather, it might as well have been an hour. He pointed at her. "Get back inside." But now, she hesitated, eyes filling, but she obeyed, sprinting toward the house. Luke turned back to the bus. The front end had crushed inward far enough that the driver was pinned against the steering console. He wasn't moving. Luke climbed onto the small maintenance ledge near the windshield, gripping the bent metal frame. The driver moaned. Alive. Good. "Hang on," Luke said, voice steady. "I'm getting you all out." He tested the upper emergency hatch. It wouldn't budge. Ice had sealed it shut. Think. Think like you used to in the Guard. He dropped back to the ground, scanned the area. A fire hydrant, a metal trash bin, a steel access hook sticking up near the wall. He grabbed the hook, jammed it under the emergency hatch, and heaved with everything he had. For a second, nothing happened. Then the hatch snapped free with a loud crack. The bus jerked sideways, metal grinding beneath it. People screamed inside. Luke hauled himself up again and forced the hatch open fully. A blast of warm, terrified breath rushed out. "Okay," he yelled into the cabin. "One at a time, don't rush me." A teenage boy was closest. Luke reached in, grabbed him by the back of the coat, and guided him out onto the roof of the bus. Crawl to the side wall, Luke instructed. Hands flat. Don't stand. The boy nodded, terrified, and slid toward the retaining wall. Behind him, an older woman shook her head, frozen in fear. I can't. My legs. Yes, you can. Luke reached in again. You're getting out, now. He braced his boots on the roof, wrapped his hands under her arms, and lifted. Pain shot through his ribs, the bruises from the tanker tightening like a vice, but he kept moving. He got her out. Then another, and another. Each time he pulled someone through the hatch, the bus shifted dangerously. The front tire slipped another inch toward the drop. Inside, a toddler shrieked. The mother holding him was pale, trembling. Please, she whispered. My baby. He's only 3. Please don't let him. Luke climbed through the hatch just enough to reach her. Give him to me. Her eyes flooded with tears. You'll drop him, ma'am. Look at me. His voice was softer now, firmer. The voice he once used in sandstorms and medevac chaos, the voice that belonged to a man he didn't talk about anymore. I'm not dropping your son. Slowly, she lifted the toddler. The boy clung to her shirt, wailing. Luke reached forward, gritted his teeth, and pulled the child against his chest. The little boy's tiny hands fisted into Luke's coat. It's okay, buddy, Luke murmured. I've got you. He turned knee on the roof. The bus slid, a full foot this time. The back wheels scraped forward, parting slush. The retaining wall groaned under the weight. Move! Luke yelled at the people above. Clear the path. They scrambled aside. Luke carried the toddler toward the ridge of the bus roof ribs, screaming with each step. The mother's sobs echoed from inside as she watched. At the edge, he crouched low and slid the toddler into the arms of a teenage girl already safely against the wall. Hold him tight. As he turned back, the entire bus shifted again hard. Too hard. The front bumper slipped off the edge. Shouts exploded inside. Luke didn't think. He dove back to the hatch, grabbed the mother's wrist, and yanked her halfway through, just as the interior lights flickered violently. I've got you, he shouted. No, she screamed. My legs are stuck. He braced a knee against the hatch frame and pulled. A tearing sound came, the sound of fabric and metal parting. Her legs freed. Luke dragged her onto the roof. Then the bus lurched forward with a deafening crack. It was going. He had seconds. Only the pinned driver remained. Luke threw himself toward the windshield, grabbed the metal frame, and smashed his elbow into the cracked glass. Once, twice, a third time until the pain gave way. The driver was dazed, blood streaking down his temple. I can't feel. I know, Luke said, voice a low rasp. You don't have to feel your legs, just your arms. He grabbed the driver under the shoulders, planting his boots against the dashboard for leverage. The cold seeped through his coat, straight into his bones, but he didn't stop. Move. Pull. Live. The bus groaned, tilted. Luke, a familiar voice, shrieked from the top of the alley. Lily. Dad, get out of there. He looked up briefly, and for a split second, fear and pride collided inside him. His daughter. Watching him risk everything. Watching him choose the fire again when the world said he shouldn't. He clenched his jaw. Not yet, he whispered. He pulled the driver free inch by inch until the man's body slid through the broken windshield. Hold on to me, Luke shouted. He wrapped one arm around the driver's chest, used the other to grip the hatch frame, and heaved them upward. The bus dropped. A full-body jolt threw both men sideways. Luke's fingers slipped. The driver's weight dragged at him. No. Luke snarled, forcing every muscle in his battered frame to obey. He tightened his grip, dug his boots into the metal, and pushed upward with everything he had left. With a guttural roar, he shoved the driver up onto the roof edge and then climbed after him as the entire bus finally gave way. The bus slid off the retaining wall and fell crashing into the riverbed below in an explosion of ice steam and metal. Silence swallowed the alley. Then a single cry broke through. Dad Lily's voice. Luke lay on his back on the alley pavement, snow falling onto his face. Breath, heaving, ribs aching. The driver lay beside him, unconscious but alive. People from the evacuated bus were gathered around now. A woman, the toddler's mother, covered her mouth with shaking hands, tears pouring down her cheeks. He saved us, she whispered. All of us. One of the teenagers wiped his eyes. He didn't even think twice. An elderly man put a hand to his heart. That's a real hero right there. Lily pushed through the crowd, dropped to her knees beside him, and threw her arms around his neck. Dad, she sobbed. Don't ever scare me like that again. He wrapped an arm around her trembling shoulders. I had to, kiddo, he whispered. They needed someone. From the street above, emergency lights flared blue, red, blue again, illuminating the frozen alley like a battlefield. But the real shift happened in the eyes surrounding him. Fear turned to awe. Judgment melted into respect. And for the first time since that tanker fire, the world looked at Luke Harrigan not as a toll operator, not as a man under investigation, but as the one person who stepped into the storm when everyone else froze. Everything was about to change. Snow spiraled through the beams of the ambulance lights, settling on twisted metal and shattered ice. The river below hissed where the bus had torn into it, steam rising like ghosts. Paramedics swarmed the alley, voices sharp and urgent, their boots crunching over frozen debris. But for a moment, just a moment, everything around Luke Harrigan felt strangely still. He sat against the retaining wall, Lily clinging to him, her tiny fingers gripping the torn fabric of his coat, as if she could anchor him to earth. The rescued passengers gathered in a semicircle nearby, wrapped in blankets that fluttered in the wind. Their breath hung in pale clouds. Their eyes never left him. The woman whose toddler he'd carried from the roof knelt in front of him, tears freezing on her cheeks. You saved my son, she whispered. I don't have words for that. Luke shook his head. Just glad you're both okay. But she wasn't the only one watching. Up at the mouth of the alley, city officials in reflective jackets had arrived, most of them the same types who'd spent the past 24 hours treating him like a nuisance. Among them stood a familiar figure, the lead inspector from the bridge authority. The same man who'd delivered the unpaid suspension to Luke's front door. He looked down at the wreckage with a stiff jaw, then at the crowd huddled around Luke. His expression flickered recognition, then confusion, then something Luke couldn't quite name. Two paramedics approached, sliding to a stop beside him. Sir, we need to get you checked out, one said, already reaching for his pulse. I'm fine, Luke said automatically. The paramedic raised an eyebrow. You just hauled half a bus of people out of a sliding death trap. Let us do our job. Lily held on tighter. Don't take him away. The medic softened. He's not going anywhere, sweetheart. Just a quick look. As they examined him, murmurs spread through the crowd. Not fearful this time, but reverent. That's the guy from the tanker fire, someone whispered. I read about him, said another. Didn't they say he caused the delay? That was politics, someone else muttered. I saw what he did tonight. That wasn't politics. That was a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The wind pushed another gust of sleet down the alley, coating everyone in a thin glaze of ice. The inspector finally made his way down the incline, boots slipping on the frozen slope. When he reached Luke, he cleared his throat as though preparing for a speech. "Mr. Harrigan," he said carefully. "I didn't expect to find you here." Luke didn't bother answering. He was too tired to pretend they were having a real conversation. The inspector shifted uncomfortably. "I've been informed that emergency services witnessed the rescue." He swallowed. "Multiple rescues, actually." "Yeah," Luke said quietly. A long pause. "Mr. Harrigan, I need to ask you something. For the record." The inspector leaned closer, lowering his voice as if the truth required privacy. "Where did you learn to do what you just did?" "That wasn't improvisation. That was training." Lily looked up at her father, confused. The rescued passengers leaned in too. Luke closed his eyes for a long moment. He wasn't trying to be mysterious. He just didn't want to talk about the part of his life he'd sealed away, because every time he remembered it, he remembered everything he'd lost with it. Finally, he exhaled, letting the truth slip out like a slow breath. "I was a combat medic," he said softly. The inspector froze. One of the paramedics turned sharply. "Where 28th Infantry?" Luke answered. "New Jersey Army National Guard. 2 tours overseas." A ripple passed through the crowd, shock first, then a stunned kind of respect. The paramedic stared at him. "Jesus, man. No wonder you knew how to stabilize the driver. That traction pull you did. I haven't seen that outside military training." The inspector's jaw slackened, the truth punching through his earlier certainty like a fist. You never mentioned this in your employment file. Didn't seem relevant to charging tolls," Luke said. "But it's relevant now." The inspector murmured, his voice thin. "Very relevant." Lily's eyes were wide, searching his face. "Dad, you were a soldier, like the ones in the videos at school." Luke brushed a hand over her hair. "Yeah, kiddo. A long time ago." "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. His throat tightened. "Because I wanted your world to be simpler than mine." The inspector stepped back, visibly shaken. He looked at the wrecked bus, then at Luke, really looked at him, as though seeing him for the first time. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. The words were stark, heavy. They seemed to hang in the icy air. "Mr. Harrigan, we made assumptions about your actions, about your judgment, about who you were." He swallowed hard. "We were wrong." Luke didn't respond. He didn't need to. The crowd filled the silence for him. He risked his life. He saved children. He didn't wait for anyone. He deserves more than an apology. A woman who'd watched the rescue from her back porch stepped forward. "He's the reason these people are alive. How many of you would have walked into that?" The inspector stood stiffly, shoulders drawn, as if he were facing a tribunal. "Mr. Harrigan, you are hereby reinstated effective immediately, and the administrative review is lifted." Luke almost laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. Last night he'd been a liability. Today he was a headline. Funny how that worked. A second official hurried down the slope, panting, cell phone still pressed to his ear. Sir, it's the mayor's office," he said to the inspector. "They're asking for the name of the man who led the rescue." He glanced at Luke with awe. "They said to prioritize it." The inspector straightened, cleared his throat, and spoke into the phone. "Yes. His name is Luke Harrigan." The official relayed it into the phone. "Yes, ma'am." "That's him, 35. "Yes, ma'am. Former National Guard medic." The tone changed again, another ripple of stunned realization. The mayor wanted his name. The news wanted his name. The city that spent the last 24 hours doubting him suddenly wanted to raise him up. But the moment that struck Luke hardest wasn't the apologies or the stunned glances. It was the boy he'd pulled out first, the teenager. He approached slowly, rubbing at his thawing hands. He stopped a few feet from Luke, swallowed, and said quietly, "When the bus started sliding, everyone was screaming. But you weren't." He looked down. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone was coming for us." Luke nodded, emotion tight in his chest. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," the boy said. "They wouldn't have." The inspector took a deep breath, then turned to Luke again. "There's one more thing," he said. "Given what you've demonstrated tonight, the city is forming a crisis response liaison program. Civilian first responders who work with emergency services during weather-related incidents." He paused. "They asked if you would consider leading it." Luke blinked, caught off guard. "Me?" "You," the inspector said. "You've already proven you have the skill. And the instinct. And frankly, the guts. Most people don't." Lily gasped softly, looking from the inspector to her father. "I know we've treated you poorly," the inspector added. "But tonight changed everything. We need someone who knows what danger looks like and doesn't freeze." Luke didn't answer. Not because he didn't have one, but because the weight of everything, the bus, the fire, the accusations, the fear in his daughter's voice when she thought she might lose him, had all landed at once. He stood carefully, ribs protesting, and looked around the alley. The shattered bus, the trembling passengers, the sheet of ice where he'd nearly fallen to his death, the officials who'd once dismissed him, now waiting for his word. And above them all, his daughter staring up at him with a mixture of pride and fear and hope. He realized something in that moment. The city didn't need a hero. It needed someone who understood what it felt like to be ignored, and still stepped forward anyway. He looked back at the inspector. "I'll think about it," Luke said quietly. "Right now I need to get my daughter home." The inspector nodded quickly, respectfully. "Of course, take all the time you need." As Luke wrapped an arm around Lily and began guiding her back up the snowy incline, the crowd parted for him. The mother with the toddler, the elderly man, the teenagers, the paramedics, even the officials who'd doubted him before. They stepped aside, not because they were told to, but because they finally understood who they were looking at. And for the first time, the path in front of Luke Harrigan wasn't blocked by doubt or judgment or protocol. It was open, waiting, leading somewhere new. And he could feel deep in his bones that the decision he made next would change everything. Word spread faster than the storm clouds cleared. By sunrise, the riverbank was still coated in shattered ice, but Luke Harrigan's name was on every news bulletin in the state. The governor called for an official commendation. The mayor announced an emergency meeting. Even the bridge authority, in a move that stunned its own employees, issued a statement praising the decisive actions of a civilian hero whose courage prevented mass tragedy. By mid-morning, reporters swarmed his front sidewalk, but this time their voices weren't sharp. They weren't hunting for someone to blame. They were searching for the man who'd climbed into a storm and walked children back out. Mrs. Russo answered the door again and again with the same barked reply. "He's sleeping. Leave him alone." Eventually, the crowd thinned. Respect replaced intrusion. Later that day, the inspector who had suspended Luke showed up at the duplex, hat in hand. He didn't carry paperwork. This time he carried a letter of apology on department letterhead, the ink still fresh. He offered it without speeches, without excuses. "I can't undo what we put you and your daughter through," he said quietly. "But I can promise it won't happen again." Luke accepted the letter, and for the first time since the tanker fire, he saw something honest in the man's eyes. Accountability. Maybe even regret. The next week brought the ceremony. It wasn't fancy, just a small podium in front of the municipal building, a few folding chairs, the flag hanging limp in the cold wind. But when the mayor pinned the medal on him, the applause that rose from the crowd wasn't polite. It was grateful. Real. Born from the voices of the men, women, and children he'd pulled from the sliding bus. Lily sat in the front row, legs swinging in excitement, wearing a new coat someone from the fire department had bought her. When Luke stepped down from the stage, she ran straight into his arms. "Everyone at school said you're a hero," she told him breathlessly. He pressed his forehead gently against hers. "Being your dad is enough of a hero job for me." But the world wasn't done giving him responsibility. The city's emergency director pulled him aside. "That crisis response program we mentioned," she said, handing him a folder. "It's yours if you want it. Built from the ground up, your training, your leadership, your rules. We think you've earned the chance to make things safer for everyone." Luke opened the folder, saw the outline, the proposed budget, the title at the top, Civilian Rapid Response Coordinator, Provisional Position. He didn't say yes immediately. He didn't have to. The director could see it on his face, that quiet understanding that this wasn't a job offer. It was purpose. 2 months later, the program launched. Luke traded the toll booth for an office in an old converted firehouse. The city gave him a 5-person team. He hired people who knew the streets better than a textbook ever could. A retired paramedic, a volunteer firefighter, a mechanic from Sal's Auto, who'd once pulled a neighbor from a burning kitchen, and 2 veterans who recognized the look in his eyes before he ever told them his past. The work was hard, the hours long. But Luke came home every night with something he hadn't felt in years, a sense that he mattered. Lily noticed it first. "You smile more now," she told him one evening while they ate spaghetti at the tiny kitchen table. Luke chuckled. "Do I? Yeah. Not just at me, at everything." Mrs. Russo, sitting with her knitting, nodded. "You've got your shoulders back again," she said. "A man walks different when he believes in what he's doing." The city changed, too. The Bridge Authority rolled out new training policies. Neighborhoods along the river installed better lighting. A cold weather protocol put emergency crews closer to high-risk areas. Every improvement carried Luke's fingerprints, even if his name wasn't on the memos. And the people he'd rescued, they didn't forget. A card arrived from the toddler's mother every holiday. The teenager wrote him a letter the day he got into community college, thanking him for showing me what bravery looks like before I ever got the chance to learn it. Even the bus driver visited once, walking stiffly but alive. He sat across from Luke in the firehouse office and said I was gone. Gone. And you dragged me back. He didn't stay long, just long enough to shake Luke's hand with both of his. Spring finally thawed the river. The ice melted. Life returned to normal, or something better than normal. One warm April evening after Lily had gone to bed, Luke stepped out onto the small front porch. The sun had dipped low, turning the sky purple and gold. Cars hummed on the distant streets. Somewhere down the block, a radio played an old Springsteen song. He sat on the porch step, elbows on his knees, breathing in the quiet. A lot had changed. A lot had healed. But in the center of it all, one truth had settled deep inside him. He wasn't invisible anymore. He didn't need a uniform to prove his worth. Didn't need medals. Didn't need the approval of people who thought they knew him from a distance. He just needed to keep showing up when it mattered, where it mattered, for the people who needed someone to step in. And maybe that was the kind of courage the world needed more of. When he finally stood and headed inside, he paused at the door, listening to the soft sounds of his daughter sleeping. A quiet smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Sometimes the storms that nearly break you aren't punishments. Sometimes they're invitations to become the person you were meant to be all along.